Welcome to episode 26 of 100 Years of Marine Corps Tankers, a station dedicated to honoring the legacy of Marine tankers and remembering the stories of what made the community special, told through those words of the Marines who towed the line. For this episode, I am joined by an Armor Officer who has had a very impressive career serving with the United States Marine Reserves. From early on as a platoon commander until serving as the XO for 4th Tank Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Edward Oglesby has done so with distinction. Welcome to the channel, sir.
Hey, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, sir. It's my pleasure. Thanks for coming on here today. So let's bring it back to 1996. What made you want to join the officer corps for the Marines?
Yeah, it was actually even before that. In 1995, I applied to OCC at the end of. I had studied architecture, and my father and a lot of people of my parents' generation served in the military, and my brother had gone to the Naval Academy, and I just thought, I wasn't sure what I was going to do, and I thought it'd be a good thing to do. I enjoyed the outdoors, hunting, hiking, all sorts of stuff. So I considered a bunch of different options, and the Marine Corps certainly was the right fit for me.
Yes, sir.
So I did not get in the first time. I reapplied, and I got in for the class that picked up in January of 1996.
And that was Frozen Winter Charlie. It's a fun time to be there.
Yeah, it was. We had a high attrition rate, and the weather was miserable, which I'm sure everyone that's been in Quantico has probably had a little bit of that, whether it's summer or winter. But
Yes,
we had feet of snow, and I think we graduated 148 out of 256. So I mean, people all have those numbers, but it was pretty brutal. But I was fortunate to figure out that I could make it, and made it. Did fairly well. Surviving's fairly well.
Yes, sir. Nothing like the Quigley in December.
Yeah, breaking the ice with the butt of your gun.
Right. 1996, graduated with the basic school, also with Charlie, and then went on to flight school. 97, you were at flight school.
Yeah, so I was a flight contract when I was at the basic school. I liked the ground side of things. I inquired about potentially changing to a ground contract, and they were pretty upfront. They said, look, hey, you're going to be a shortfall MOS if you change at this point, something like an adjutant. And I said, well, I think I'll stick with flight school. So my brother was a pilot in the Navy, F-18 pilot. I didn't have any experience flying. I went to flight school, started, and I didn't enjoy it. I was doing okay, but I really did not like it. And so I said, you know what? I'm not sure I want to dedicate 8 to 12 years of my life to something that I'm not sure about. So I dropped and magically became an adjutant. So the good thing about becoming an adjutant was I could go anywhere because they needed them everywhere. I ended up going to El Toro, and then we closed that down with Marine Air Control Group 38, and then went on to Miramar in 98, 99. So that was 2 years and a little bit with the Air Wing as an adjutant. And how did I transition? I actually was looking at what to do in the reserves, and I wanted to do something on the ground side. And 4th Tank Battalion is actually on board East Miramar. So I called up, and I don't know who it was, but I asked the duty kind of where they were, and they told me, and I drove over in my camis and walked in to, asked if the I&I was around. And I didn't understand the reserves, but Lieutenant Colonel Robeson was there in his blues, sharp, squared away. And I explained that I was a adjutant, and I was interested in joining the Marine Corps tanks and the reserves. We proceeded to have one of the shortest interviews I've ever been a part of. He said, you're an adjutant. Why do you want to be in tanks? And I said, I want to shoot things and blow stuff up, and you can't do that behind a desk. And he said, you're hired. And that was the end of that. So he said, can you go to tank school? And I said, yes. And my IEAS on October 1st, I think, and was actually drilling October 1st with Delta Company, which was up at March Air Force Base. So I lived in Dallas and commuted to California for reserves.
And that's that's a very difficult assignment. Working with a couple of the reservists, especially the reserve officers, who would fly from the East Coast all the way out to Camp Pendleton. People don't realize the wear and tear and really the difficult nature of that particular environment and that assignment. And I've said it before, and I've said it the last couple of episodes that I couldn't be a reservist. What you gentlemen do is just phenomenal. Your ability to work, Monday through Friday, and then Friday become a officer, in this case, a Marine officer in armor, fly, how many hundreds of miles, drill, and then have to fly back to go back to your civilian career. So that's absolutely incredible. With Delta Company, so you were there at OJT, and then when you went up to Knox, January to May of 2000, as part of the Armor Officer Basic course in Fort Knox. What are some of your early memories of tank school?
Well, so when I arrived at tank school, I was a little bit out of the ordinary because I was a captain, and Mike Purcell and Brian Lewis and Lee Rush were at the schoolhouse. I can't remember who the DET OIC was, but I met all three of them, and then went over to AOB and checked in. And because I was a senior person, they asked me to be in charge of the class, and I said I thought that they should put some Army guys in charge of the class. Thought that'd be good for them leadership wise, and they said, well, we think you should be it. And so I said, okay, I'm going to run it like a Marine. Just want you to want to be up front. And they said, that's fine. And so I walked out, and there were three other Marines, Ted Folsom, Neil Hickey, and Nate Herman, who were also in my AOB class. And I said, hey, first sergeant, guide, XO, let's run this like we'd run everything else. And they had just gotten out of TBS, and so we did. And there were times when the Marine Corps way of doing things didn't agree with the Army way of doing things, but we figured it out, and everything went pretty well. All four of us did very well. They proactively tried to break us apart. They put us in different platoons, but we stuck together. And there were a lot of outstanding Army officers there too. Made a lot of friends for life there. So it was a good experience. But again, went through the winter. So when you're in a tank and the heater doesn't work, which everyone's probably been through, your feet turn into blocks of ice and you're standing behind the exhaust trying to warm up. But overall, a good experience for someone with obviously no experience on tanks. It was the right way to go for me.
I've made the comment before that Fort Knox is probably the coldest place I've ever been in my life. Because it was probably about 40, maybe 50 degrees, and we were working. So I was sweating. I sweat through my CVCs, and then the temperature dropped by like 30 degrees. And I mean, that was the coldest I've ever been in my life. So graduated in AOB, like you said, very, very high on the list, one of the honor graduates. And then May of 2000, headed back to Delta Company, 4th Tank Battalion, where you served as the 3rd Platoon Commander. And this is kind of where it gets a little bit interesting, because during this time, September 11th happened. And obviously that was a change, changed the world, certainly changed the United States, and most certainly changed the Marine Corps. So what was it like being a platoon commander for the reserves during this period of time when the nation had just changed dramatically?
Well, so I had put in for company command. Rick Warmbold was the company commander before me, and he had previously been Alpha Company commander with 4th Tanks. And so my date to have the change of command was September 17th, and September 11th happened. And just like you and everybody else, I actually witnessed it happening. All the planes stopped flying. I didn't know how I was going to get out to California, much less what was going to happen. The change of command did happen, and we all figured that lots of people were going to be going lots of places. Deployments were going to happen. We didn't know where or when, but I just took that to heart. And I want to say the people in the reserves, the Marines, the I&I staff with Delta Company, Mike Thomas was I&I. People on my tank, I showed up and had new tankers, 2 new tankers, one of whom is Chang. He went on to become a master gunner in Espinosa. Those guys were on my tank for years, but we all knew we were going somewhere, or we thought we would be. And so we just gotten done with CAX in 2001 with Major Warmbold as CO. So I felt like we were in pretty good shape. And over the next, what would it be, year and a half, the I&I staff, compliments to them, worked very hard to make sure our training time was used to the utmost. And we got, I think we had 14 tank crews for a reserve company. That, well, for any company, that's what you want. But that's probably one of the reasons that we were on the list to get activated when that happened, that opportunity happened, because we had been training hard. We trained out in 29 Palms. We trained in Camp Pendleton, and just like all the other tank companies, we felt like we were ready when the call came. So the call came in January of 2003.
And during that time, you had become the commanding officer. So now the call came. Your unit's going out there. You're the commanding officer. To kind of set the stage for us, sir, as to how that came to be, and really as a relatively new commander, what were some of the thoughts going through your head?
So one of the things you hear in the Marine Corps in all disciplines is needs of the Marine Corps. And I found out we were going to get activated. We had done Steel Night with some of the active duty units in November of 2002. And when we were activated, we were going to fall in with 1st Tank Battalion. And 1st Tank Battalion had four companies and H&S company, but 2 of the companies had MU platoons that were either in workups or deployed. And so what they needed, they were going to need tank crews, they were going to need tank platoons, they were going to need people in the trains. And so when we showed up, Delta Company, 4th Tanks, which was my company, ended up turning into a heavy platoon for Charlie Company, a section for Delta Company, my platoon, which went with Bravo Company, and then we put tank crewmen in all the different Alpha Company, I think the CO's tank, my gunner was on he might have been on the Master Gunner's tank, but one of those. But we went, basically my tank company got split up and put into all the spots that they needed within 1st Tanks, which, when you're a company commander or when you're an officer, you don't want to train with your guys and then see them go somewhere else. But the COs of the companies, Lieutenant Colonel Chartier was the CO of the battalion, and Benitez, I think, was the battalion master gunner. And then Brian Lewis was the Bravo Company CO who I served with. Greg Poland was Delta Company CO. Matt Banning was the Alpha Company CO. And I'm drawing a blank right now of the other officers, but they were well set up, and we were happy to fall in. So I ended up going back to, after a year and a half of being in company command, going back to a platoon commander, which simplified life significantly. Funny story, the other officers in Bravo Company were Jeremy Cheslow was the XO, and Chad Hall was the 1st platoon commander, and Tim McLaughlin was 2nd platoon commander. And I was aware that myself, again, being a captain and then becoming a platoon commander, I had met Brian Lewis at tank school, but I thought that might be a challenging circumstance. So the first thing I did is I went into to Cheslow's office and said, "Hey, do you have a second to talk?" "Sure." Closed the door, and I said, I understand that this is a little bit out of the ordinary, but I want you to know that I'm a platoon commander and you're the XO, and you're going to have to get me to do things. And, that's fine. I mean, we'll have, good military discipline, courtesy, and everything else, but you got to help the CEO run this company. And he said, I'm really glad you came in. I mean, I'll paraphrase, but he said, thank you very much. And that ended up working out. So we were on the ground there for maybe a week. It might have been 5 days, I don't know, but got on a plane and headed towards the Middle East. We landed in Germany, and we were ready to get off the plane, and they came out and said, no one can get off the plane, which was a bummer. But then we got to Kuwait and got in these buses and went up to Camp Ripper, which was where 7th Marines was out of in northern Kuwait, south of Safwan. And it turns out that some of the planes with other units on it had come through the same base and gotten off the plane and had a good time. And they decided that we didn't need to do the same thing. No one got in trouble, significant trouble, but I was like, what? Why aren't we getting off the plane? And then once I got there, I said, oh, now I understand. So we get to Kuwait, and we are in those tents. There is not a shred of anything living anywhere. It's just desert. And I'm with Bravo Company, and we go pick up our tanks probably a week and a half later, go out to Udari range and zero them with service ammunition and make sure we got everything set up. And then they made the decision of the organization and how we were going to be during the invasion. Bravo Company was cut from 1st Tanks to 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines. And then within 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, 3rd Platoon, which was my platoon, was cut to Kilo Company. So in the old days, it would have been Team Tank was Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines. Team Mech would have been Kilo Company, which is who I was with during the entire invasion.
So let's circle back a little bit to a couple of things. One, like you'd mentioned, the Delta Company was broken up, like you said, but really that mission set is important to highlight the role of the reservists, particularly in combat operations, because yes, we can call it broken up or we can call it augmentation, and really I think augmentation is a more appropriate term because
I agree.
The reserves serve as an absolute force multiplier. And, I have a personal experience when we went out to Iraq to rip with a reserve company. We had about another week or so on our books where we thought we were going to have to go through, fix the gun books, fix the maintenance logs, do the PMCS, and basically take what we expected to be a hunk of junk and get it ready for combat operations. And that was my first experience working with the reserves. When we got out there, those tanks were immaculate. All the books were in order. The Marines were ready to rock and roll. And I mean, it was just absolute professionalism at the highest level. So that was my first experience with the reserves. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to work for 4th Tank Battalion. I wanted to be an I&I. So I think augmentation is really, really important to bring out here and force multiplier. Yeah. The other one is how special of an experience was it for you? Because I know for me, the first time I saw that black tag with that service ammunition, it like for me, that was a life-changing moment. Because, we always heard about service ammunition, but in the States, obviously you're not allowed to fire it. So everything's blue. For me, seeing that black tip ammo coming off that truck, going inside that tank, it was a game changer. And mentally it like flipped a switch in my brain. Did you have a similar experience with that?
It was one of many. I'll tell you what, going and picking up our tanks, they'd been brought in MPF offload, and here was a line of, I don't know how many tanks, but 60 tanks. They were in great shape. There was Cosmoline, like the 50 cal had never been shot. as far as I could tell, there wasn't a scratch on it. I talked to all our Marines, and let me go back to the Marines. The Marines, both active duty and reservists that I was there with, were just superior. They made life so much easier because they knew what to do, they knew how to do it, and they allowed everybody to focus on what their job task was. But back to the service ammunition, when we went down to Udari, we had uploaded this stuff, and you realize that you're shooting the real stuff. And we, just from my personal perspective, we were still in Kuwait and we were still in the desert, but now we had, our tanks were hitting, they were all ready, they were all set up, but we didn't know if it was going to happen or not. The Army and the Air Force and the Marine Corps and the Navy are all schooling up, and different countries are schooling up down there in Kuwait. But you kind of start thinking, maybe this guy's gonna, give up, take a flight to somewhere where he won't get deported or something, So although we had service ammunition, we were ready, it really didn't hit home until we packed up onto our tanks and drove north from Camp Ripper. At that point, you knew it was go time, because not only did we have some missiles coming over from the north towards the various bases, and there were Patriot missile batteries going at them when they came across, but there was a bombardment of Safwan Hill with the artillery. We were breaching not me, but the engineers. People were breaching the fence into Iraq. And I remember going through, it was in the early morning, but I remember watching one of the companies come up off our left side, and just a company in full attack, basically going towards the border. But it'll send shivers down your spine when you see that happening, because you realize that stuff is, it's real, it's going to happen. And when we went across the border, there was a border guard standing at the broken fence, and I waved at him, and off we went. And I said, "Hey, we're in Iraq, guys. Be ready." That's when, once we were up there, that's when I realized. I mean, I thought this was going to happen, but you just don't know. They can always pull the plug.
Right. Another term you brought out, I don't think has ever been brought out in the channel before, and I think it's important to get out because it really kind of is a Marineism, is Team Mech and Team Tank. And we threw that out there. Most of the audience are tankers. I already know that as a fact, but for those that are not, or for those of us that might have forgotten what it is, can you kind of run through as to how that is broken out and why there's a difference there?
Yes. So, and this goes back to what precursored Mojave Viper and some of those. CAX was run for years and years out in 29 Palms, and they would, well, I'm not going to use the term breakup, but they would shift the organization of the battalion around.
We'll go with reallocate, sir.
Reallocate. They would reallocate assets so that you had combined arms. You had a heavy asset, which would be the tank company, and usually they would take one platoon out of that tank company and put it with an infantry company. That infantry company, in many cases, was on Amtracs, so they had tank support for the infantry, and then the infantry company would cut a platoon over the tank. So that was Team Tank would be 2 tank platoons, the tank headquarters for the company, and then some augments, which would be the infantry and potentially engineers and other Marines. And then Team Mech would be 2 typically meched up platoons of the infantry with the infantry headquarters, and then a platoon of tanks. And in our case, we had 88 with us as well. So we had the support that we needed, because we were not, although 3-4 operated as a battalion the whole time, we did not cross paths all the time with other tanks.
Hmm.
And that is something that other people have mentioned on your channel, and I will reiterate. The first time that you order or request a resupply, and you're being resupplied by not a tank familiar asset, they think that you put an extra 0 on your request by mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And they will show up with 40 gallons of fuel, and you need 400 for 4 tanks.
Right.
That stuff happens regularly. And what I won't say regularly, it happens once, and then they realize, oh wait, no, you need a whole truck of fuel.
Mm-hmm.
But you go through those growing pains. And although I'm sure we're going to get to the actual combat, one of the other things that as a tanker you see, but sometimes is not appreciated by people that haven't worked with tanks, is the ferocity and the lethality that tanks bring when in combat. Because in training, frequently you're trying to get through or trying to hit certain training objectives, and it might be calling in air, calling in artillery, working with different units. And when you have direct firepower, which tanks bring, if you can see it, typically you can engage with it and destroy it. And that was something when we first got contact, they were getting ready to put together a call for fire, and a couple of minutes later, it was almost all over. And that's something that is even as a tanker, when you look back after that happens, and I look back over the back hatch, I said, I cannot believe the destructive power we just wrought and how quickly it happened.
To try to set the stage for us, sir. You
Yep.
brought us into Iraq. So you guys cross into Iraq. You realize now you are in enemy AO, basically, because the whole thing at that point was unsecure. You didn't really know exactly what was going on. So what, as a relatively, I mean, obviously you're probably the most senior platoon commander because obviously you had the company commander time on your belt, but combat is combat for everybody. And if you've never been there, obviously that experience is different for everyone. What was going through your mind when you realized, hey, this is, like you said, this is go time?
So one of the things, and again, through some of your other interviews, you hear little bits and pieces. One of the things that was paramount for me was I wanted to burn up 100, I can't remember what it was, 100 gallons of fuel, because we had fuel bladders hanging off the side of our tank, and obviously it's not armored. So as soon as we got to that point, we dropped them, put them behind the tracks, backed the tanks up on the fuel bladders, and then put the fuel in, and we got a GPS coordinate and left them just for safety. I didn't want fuel all over my tank. But as we went through, we saw some, and honestly, we saw some goat herder, local type Iraqi people who, they had not a care in the world. And once we got up on Route Tampa, which went from Safwan up towards the, it went west of Basra, basically. We went up there, and there were some high tension power lines that were down, and a couple of the Tank Battalion units had gotten in some scuffles up there. And so at that point that it's real. And although at that point we hadn't shot main gun or anything, it was very real. We were in bad guy territory. We weren't in our backyard anymore. And so you're using your map, you're writing down anything that's coming across. Hey, we've got reports of, enemy here, trying to map it, trying to know where you are, tracking where you're going, all of that stuff, which all comes through in the training. And I will back up one thing that I left out. 2 people that you've interviewed already were 2 of the platoon sergeants in the other tank platoons, Nick Popovich and Troy Yates. And then my platoon sergeant was Timmy Leggett. all three of those people, along with Master Sergeant Johnson, Top J, were, you know, there are excellent people all over the Marine Corps, but I can't dream of a better group of people to go into combat with, helping lead the Marines and take care of business. But I digress. So when we got up there, and I could see some tanks off in the distance, saw some power lines down. We drove across them and continued on our way. At this point, we had not gotten into the fight. It's still day one. It's still the morning of day one, and we were supposed to get off of Route Tampa and go up a couple of routes that went towards Basra. And there was a gas oil separation facility that Bravo Company was gonna go take care of. And then we were going up a route called Route Kilo, because we were Kilo Company. So we're hearing some reports on the radio that there's some enemy in the area, but haven't gotten any reports of tanks, any reports of, you know, heavy stuff or any air. And as we go up Route Kilo, I spotted what I thought was a enemy PC, and I asked my gunner, Valencia Banos, fantastic gunner, was scanning, going, you know, switching magnifications, going daylight to you know, thermals, and I said, "Do you see something over here?" And I dropped down and looked in my sight, and he was scanning over there, and it wasn't showing up. And I was like, "Okay, let's keep going." We were going up, and I said, "Are you sure you don't see anything?" "No." And eventually, I could see that this was not. It wasn't a pile of sand. And I called, "Hey, you know, we got contact," and I slaved the main gun over, and you know, as you can see in your background, the turret doesn't stop on a dime. I dropped my TC override, and it skidded past what was a PC, and it ended up straight on a tank that was broadside to us. It was a T-54, T-55. It was about 800 meters, and it was, I will give the Iraqis a lot of credit. They're dug in positions. We couldn't see them. They were well done, and they'd been there for a while, so they looked natural. Anyhow, we engaged. It turned out to be what I thought was probably a mechanized mech infantry company. I can't remember what they call them in the Soviet bloc, but it was a handful of tanks, handful of PCs, and the engagement we lasted probably what was maybe a mile. I don't know. And once you start engaging, you just, you know, if there's an enemy there, you keep driving into them and you keep engaging, and we did. And they shot at us, we shot back at them. Thankfully, they didn't hit us because of the proximity, but had catastrophic kills on a lot of things. It was a little bit we were well disciplined. All the Marines did an excellent job, but it is a bit chaotic when an engagement happens, because when you're shooting tank tables, you know, this enemy pops up and you identify them and you engage them, and then they're down. In real life, you know, it's not one or two targets. In this case, it was well over 10, and there were 4 tanks engaging. So we came out, spread out into online, and just started taking care of business. In addition to that, there were PCs, there were trucks, there were troops. It was a little bit chaotic. And we actually busted a holding line that we were supposed to stop at, but we were still engaging. So So at the end of the whole thing, there was some sort of a Soviet bloc truck with ammunition on it, which we destroyed and then stopped. And that was when I called back, and they had stopped the Amtraks and just watched this whole thing occur. And it was, even I, who had been in tanks for a handful of years, could not believe the amount of destruction that we had just inflicted on the enemy. And it was, once it got going, the tanks, the M1A1 is an extraordinarily capable tank. Our 3 tank, Sergeant Perez, Staff Sergeant Perez, his hydraulics went out, so he was having to fight manual mode, which, you know, occasionally you practice, but when you're a gunner and you're trying to crank the turret around, actually shooting the ammo or, you know, trying to engage things, that is a total nightmare. But one of their FRH lines or hydraulic lines, whatever it was, let go. But that was the first engagement, and it was devastating for the enemy. And I felt pretty thankful, because, as I said, it was not just sitting hulks.
Right.
You know, a couple of them fired at us, and one of them fired at me, and it ended up, I didn't know at the time. I actually saw it fire. I thought it was a sagger. We used to do sagger drills, because it was pointed right at me. And all I saw was fire and something coming, and it ended up hitting below the tank, and we ended up getting a catastrophic kill on it. But actually, the 2 tank did. But Brian Porter was my wingman, went on to be a first sergeant. Perez was the 3 tank, and then Gunny Leggett at the time who also was a first sergeant, was my platoon sergeant. So that's the first engagement. But I did look, I was open, my hatch was open, and I looked over the back of the hatch, and there was, you know, there were burning vehicles. I mean, you know, burning tanks, people running around. I mean, it was chaotic, but that's what we were there for.
Absolutely. And that story is incredibly invaluable, particularly since during that time, the news media had it wrong, because the news media said it was a cakewalk and said that, you know, they weren't fighting. And for the guys that, like yourself, been on the ground and did that, I mean, that was a fight. That was a modern day fight as much as we have. And I mean, that's it. That's the first day of what was a very, very long deployment. How did you guys, after that, how did you guys consolidate, rest, rearm, refit? And when was the next time that you went out and found the enemy again?
So it didn't take long. We went up to a little town called, I think it's called Zaffarina, but it's in between Route Kilo and the Basra Airport. We rearmed, and they said, we're going to take down the Basra Airport. 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines was. And so my platoon, well, excuse me, correction, Kilo Company was going to come in from the west, which is where all the airfield is. And then I believe, I wasn't that familiar, but Bravo Company and the other infantry company were going to go in kind of the main entrance, or from the south. And you've discussed with Pop and Troy Yates, them coming down that south end there, gotten some engagements, and so in the night we rearmed and rolled down this hill from kind of a highway that was to the southwest. As we went down the hill, there was a there was a berm with a fence on top of it. It was just like any airport you might see here. They'd probably have a big dirt berm, maybe 10 feet tall, and, you know, road around it with a Cox fence. And as we were approaching that, one of the tanks got stuck. It wasn't their fault. All the ground looked the same, and it was dark, but they hit a soft spot, so they sank. The 2 tank went over to help them, and an infantry probably a squad was in the dark trying to sneak up on them. Of course, they had thermals, so that went poorly for the enemy. But Gunny Liggett and I, our job was to go into the airport and make sure that it was, clear of enemy. So we went up the hill, and when we looked at the airport, there were armored vehicles, multiple armored vehicles all over the place. Some of them ended up being just ones that they apparently had parked on the runway to not allow usage of the runway. But there were some that were driving around at the north end especially. So we roll over 2 tanks. I said, oh, wow, contact, back up, let's get a plan, the whole top hat, let's go over the thing together. And we went over and started shooting the vehicles, whether they were occupied or not, and then moved to the north end of the runway. And at that point, we actually had a PC that was at a pretty good range, pretty long range, going pretty fast. And we had marker panels. All the friendlies had marker panels, and this didn't have them. And I actually called up, I double checked, and this thing was making a long drive. And I said, I really don't want any blue on blue, and we didn't have any friendlies out there, and it didn't have marker panels. So we took it out, and it was the enemy. But it was a little bit, some of the things we saw in Iraq, we had given Iraq some weapons when they were in a fight with Iran about 10 years, 20 years before this. So there was still some old US military stuff in play for the Iraqis, which made it a little bit challenging. Right. But we took down the Basra airport. Again, this is now going into the next day. The Brits came up and relieved us in place, and then we went rearmed and headed up towards Nasiriyah. Again, I think this was Route Tampa, went up the west side of Nasiriyah across a bridge that was under construction there. So everyone's getting pretty tired at this point, but adrenaline's keeping you going. And so we rearmed and drove, and finally we had to stop because vehicles were breaking. It wasn't the tanks that were breaking, but we were having other vehicles where the tracks were just getting driven off of them, or the turbochargers were letting go. And eventually we got up to the south side of the river there, and west of Nasiriyah, refueled there. And then that was, I don't know, 2 or 3 days in, they actually said, you guys got to pull off. You guys got to get some rest. Like, you got to figure out some way to get some rest because, we've been going for 3 or 4 days at this point. So we got some rest, rotated, got back on the road, and that's when the sandstorm hit. And there's actually a picture. I don't know if you have it, but sandstorm was March 25th, and I couldn't see the end of the gun tube. It got progressively worse, but we were at first leading the column, and it was a dirt road under construction, and we couldn't see very well, and slowed down to crawl. And then I actually got a ground guide out, my loader, and I had to stop because I couldn't see my loader anymore. And by the time he got on the tank, I couldn't see the end of the gun, but I couldn't see the end of the tank, not just the gun tube. It was just, and I called back and I said, I can't see anything. And we stopped. We stopped for, I don't know how many hours we were stopped, but there was just dust everywhere. After it was done, it rained that night. Everything was covered in muck. There was dirt and everything, like, that mud, fine silt. Right. But again, as soon as we got moving again, we crossed paths later with second tanks. We were kind of hopscotching a little bit. We went into Diwania, and we made a run across to the east to resupply. I think it was RCT1, because there were some problems in Nasiriyah. They couldn't get resupplies through there. You know, it would take a long time to describe everything. So if I'm glossing over stuff, just let me know. But we went into Diwania, and there was a fight in Diwania, and you know, some crazy stuff happened. There were some guys that engaged a tank with a taxi cab and AK-47s. I mean, you know,
Right.
that's going to be a losing battle for them, and it was. Bravo Company was there. I mean, that was a true engagement, although they didn't have any tanks there. And then went up across the bridge at Numanaya, which later, after the invasion was done, we found out wasn't actually strong enough to have tanks go across, according to General Mattis, which was kind of a bridge like the one that goes out to Coronado. It's a huge, sweeping, high bridge, and they you know, did the calculations and said it was good, and it was good. It didn't fall down, but later on, after we were retrograding, General Mattis came and talked to 1st Tank Battalion. He said, "Hey, you know that bridge? Well, we went back and recalculated, and it, you know, we were all like, oh, geez,
thanks."
Yeah. So we get across, and then we attack into Al-Qut. And there's actually a picture of us leaving Al-Qut. We got into it with some T-64s and on the northwestern approach to Al-Qut, and that was they were all destroyed. We also got ambushed, and Brian Lewis took around in the hand, and Mark Evnan, who was a sniper that was with 3-4, ended up being wounded and died because of that wound. We were attacked from a date palm grove, but it was, you know, again, people think it was a cakewalk. You know, I think we certainly had superiority, but I think it was because of our training, because of the people we were there with, because of the Marines, because of the planning, and our equipment. But it was not a cakewalk. And, you know, there was evidence of that when people paid the ultimate price.
Sir, made those individuals rest for sure. You know, I truly value these stories, sir. I mean, this is the exact intent of this channel, because we don't, as tankers, we didn't do as good of a job as we probably should have and could have memorializing our history. As a combat support element, you know, we support the infantry. You know, you go in the infantry regiment walls and you see their cabinets and their, you know, memorials to all the different individuals, and rightly they should have them. They absolutely should have them. But if you look, you know, the small print is a tank battalion, because that tank battalion supported that infantry unit. That you know, those infantry Marines, you know, are you know, ones that have been there are very thankful that they had armor with them. But coming from your mouth, sir, that somebody who was there and certainly lived through that, this is the exact intent of this channel. So I really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for doing this.
Absolutely. So we moved towards Baghdad from there. At one point we stopped and they parked us on the highway, like just nose to tail. We were just stacked up like cordwood, and, you know, resupply convoys, 2nd Tanks was out in front of us. And I know you've had a couple of guys that were with 2nd Tanks on. We ended up, this was one of the things that was interesting to me, for me personally, and the Marines that were with me. We came up and there was basically a firefight going on, and it was up a little ways, a couple of 100 yards maybe, and they weren't shooting at me, but I could tell by the sound of the guns that they weren't shooting at me. And I had gotten so comfortable at that time that, I mean, I was on alert for sure, but I wasn't jumping in the ditch, you know, because there was so much firing and stuff going on. I think it was Captain Houston's tank with 2nd Tanks ended up getting the fuel bladders hit, and he was wounded. And that tank, we actually passed that tank. They were in front of us. The day before they were in front of us. But we got to the outskirts, and then the bridge was blown going into Baghdad, so we had to wait. And the engineers came up, and they did a foot assault across the bridge, threw down ladders and plywood and all sorts of other junk, and got across, secured the other side. While that assault, right before that assault was happening, we were hit with artillery, and the command track for Kilo Company got hit. Unfortunately, not everyone was out of the track. Fortunately, most people were. The driver and the crew chief were not, and passed away. And the driver was actually an augment from the reserves down in Florida, Aviles. But then after they got across the bridge, the infantry got across the bridge with the help of the engineers. They built a floating bridge. And further up the way, they used a AVLB to bridge a hole and get across. I think Delta Company went across that one. But then we were in Baghdad proper. And that took, I don't know, a day or two. The Army was in Western Baghdad near the airport doing thunder runs and that kind of stuff. And we were moving north into the suburbs. And we stopped at a base. The next morning, we were going to start moving deeper into Baghdad, and that was the day that Baghdad fell. Well, the statue fell, and so we were getting direction. Hey, move up here, move up there, and we ended up in one park-like setting, in the city. And I heard, Bravo Company was going somewhere else, and it turned out they were going to Fedora Square, which was, I didn't know what was going on. Apparently, it was on all the TV channels. But funny story, the Marines, the infantry, picked out the tallest building on the square that we were on and went into the front door. And as they went in, they looked to the right, and they had the TV on because they were on generator power, and the guy saw the end of his stacked line of infantry going in the door on the TV.
Wow.
And apparently, I never saw him, but apparently the Iranian TV feed crew was on that square, not Fedora Square. And so they saw the rest of them going in and were like, hey, wait a minute, that's us. So, I'm happy that it was a very odd and interesting day. So Bravo Company and Gunny Lambert and all those guys were in Fedora Square, and we were in, I don't know, the square about a kilometer away, not on all the TV channels. But over the next week or two, we ended up guarding ammo supply dumps. There was infighting amongst the populace that we were, unless we were engaging them, we weren't necessarily supposed to be involved with. One of the Chad Hall's tank lost one of the tankers, Gonzo. They were manning a checkpoint, and some guys, everyone had weapons there, but I was not there. But he ended up being shot by some people that, approached the checkpoint and passed away. But, fantastic Marine, and just a real rough loss. As you said, the infantry, all these people were in harm's way, and I haven't done a good enough job of touching on all the names, but everyone was there doing their job, and they were doing an exceptional job. But we ended up guarding the Palestine Hotel, oddly, and I hadn't talked to my wife, who I got married to the day before I left. So we're at the Palestine Hotel, and I'm not on watch on my tank. We're doing 4-hour watches, and I got off and walked up towards the hotel, and turned out CNN was down the basement, and they had a loop of what they were showing to the world, and we just didn't have the situational awareness. We were looking at this was our part of the world.
Right.
And this was everything else. So I was sitting there watching it. I watched the feed loop once or twice, and I think her name is Christina Amanpour or something like that. She's a famous journalist person that was there. She said, "Hey, do you want to use the phone?" Well, yeah, I'd love to. Here, call whoever you want. I called my wife. I said, I'm safe. It's not over, but I'm safe. So we guarded the Palestine Hotel for a while, and then we kind of get into retrograde. A lot of Tank Battalion was over at the Martyrs Memorial, which I never went to, but that was kind of their spot. And then we started retrograding back towards Karbala. That's when we got cut from 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines back to Bravo Company, and then Bravo Company back to Tank Battalion. So during the invasion, I saw very few people. I saw Charlie Lamont, who was with Delta Company, he was the XO there, and Matt Ufford, who was one of the platoon commanders, at an intersection once, and I jumped off my tank because we had gotten stopped, and I went over and said hello to him, and then it was time to go, and I jumped back on, and you just don't know how people are doing or what's going on, because there were no bases. There wasn't a central base. So we retrograde back, Karbala, we get back together with Tank Battalion, and then we go to Diwania, where we wait on what's next. And the entire 1st Marine Division, I believe, was in this old military base. And for some reason, I think it was Ruben Martinez was the 4 and Mike Purcell was the 3. Somebody up there decided we would be in a farmer's field next to the base, which was one of the greatest things ever because we had space. We were spread out and everyone on the base was just jam-packed together. And we waited there for a couple of weeks. And people, were asked to go do certain things, but it was kind of letting the dust settle, if you will, trying to figure out what was next. And it turned out that we Tank Battalion was going to be just like everybody else, moving south, and replacement units were coming up to continue the fight and continue to secure the area. So I covered a lot of territory there, but
no, that was a great encapsulation, sir. It really was. So that took us up to I guess now May of 2003, where you came back to be the CO for Delta Company, 4th Tank Battalion, where you remained until September.
yes.
And then you did take a short stint from the reserve program where you dropped into the RR, which is the Individual Ready Reserve, where you said that you were still active. You did your MCIs. You still remained, current until 2009. And then during that time, you also attended the Command and Staff Distance Education Program.
Correct.
You graduated there. And then 2009, you came back into 4th Tanks, this time to serve as the S4 Alpha. And while you were there, you kind of ran the gamut all the way up to XO for reserve officer billets, S4 Alpha, S3. S4 is logistics, S3 is operations. Then you were the actual S4. So you were the Lago, and then you were the operations and Lago, and then eventually you were the XO. So what was that transitional period for the battalion?
So it was I always say things are an interesting time. It was an interesting time. Delta Company, my former company, had just deployed and gotten back. I think they went in 2007, so they had just gotten back, or maybe 2008. And now I was on the battalion staff, so you're viewing a bigger picture. You're not just worried about your tank company and its training, but when you go out, you're having to support 4 or 6 or however many tank companies you have out there operating. And I truly leaned heavily on the Marines that worked with me. Hazer, who was one of the tank commanders in my tank company, was the 4 chief for the reserves. And the 4 chief on the active duty side was Top Daniel. And he was awesome. And so what Hazer did a great job, but I didn't know what I was doing as far as being the 4. And we didn't have the right mix of equipment to haul people around to get the stuff done that we needed to on AT. And Top Daniel did me a solid. He came up to me and he said, "Hey, I want to give you something. I hope it'll help out." And I said, "Okay." And he gave me a folded up square of paper, and he walked off. And at this point, I'm kind of sinking under I'm relying on the Marines that are doing the heavy lifting, but I'm also trying to put together the puzzle of how we're going to do what we're supposed to do with what we've got. And I unfold the paper, and there's a razor blade inside, and it says, "Use this as a last resort, Top Daniel," which was pretty fantastic. I got a laugh out of it, and he and so many people were good as gold, because when they saw someone that was trying as hard as they could, whether they were set up for success or not, they weren't going to let you fail. You might have to learn some hard lessons, but those people are the backbone of the Marine Corps and the tank community. So I got a lot of experiences with the 4. I called it the 34 Zulu, because at one point the 3 wasn't there and the 4 wasn't there, and I had been the 4 Alpha, and they were like, you just take care of all of that. So it was learned by doing and a lot of fire hose, but it was truly relying on those Marines, those junior Marines, those NCOs, the staff NCOs. They were the people that didn't let me fail while I was learning what I was supposed to be doing. Go ahead.
Remaining there to 2012, you then went to the reserve support officer to serve as a reserve support officer, which is the RSO.
The RSSs are the main cities where the recruiting stations are operated out of. Okay. So I ended up supporting RSS Dallas, or RS Dallas, Recruiting Station Dallas, and for 3 years, and then I became the XO of the RSO detachment, and worked with Lieutenant Colonel Bell. Just some great officers and great NCOs and some great people on the active duty side. But I had not been in recruiting before, and that was an eye opener. Seeing the challenges that those Marines and those people that are doing the hard work of recruiting have to go through to try and accomplish the things that help put together what the Marine Corps is, whether it's an OCS class or a training class or the pipeline for a unit. It's pretty amazing. And that was an eye opener for me, because I had not been exposed to that up to that point in my career. And felt fortunate to be able to work with those folks.
The IMADET, it's important to mention kind of what that is. Individual mobilization augmentation detachment, and what that is just that it's Marines that are augmented to support the mission of active duty forces. And had the experience of working with 1MEF and seeing the I'm a Marines come in, and once again, I mean, they just strap in, they row the whole time they're there. They work extremely hard, force multipliers, combat multipliers, and really just some great folks. So I think it's important to kind of bring that out, because not everybody has experienced what an IMADET Marine is, or the professionalism that they bring to the team. And then once again, from May 2017 to 2019, went back into the IRR, sir, and eventually retired as a lieutenant colonel in May of 2019. And sir, as you know, this channel has a message, and it's obviously somebody like yourself that will call yourself a tank officer, and rightly should, for the rest of your life. This message of divestment is no easier on you than it is on anybody else. We're all going through this together, and we're all watching the Marine Corps tanks go away permanently. What message do you have for somebody that's currently dealing with this, active or reserve? And particularly, it's interesting to hear your answer because of how successful you have been in the civilian market. Working in the oil and gas industry since you retired, and actually before. So, for somebody that's been very successful in the civilian sector, sir, what kind of message do you have?
Uh, the one thing that I would say, well, a couple of things. One is, something that people have said on this channel before, they can't take it away from you. Like, we were all tankers. We all will be tankers, and we'll all be Marines. In the whether it's active duty or reserves, I salute the people that the Marines that decide that they're going to try something different. That's what I did, and you might find the perfect fit for you. I personally, it's very bittersweet to watch them go because of my experience, specifically in 2003. I feel like I saw, the best of what tanks can accomplish in combat, and it's going to be difficult to replace. But that being the case, I feel very fortunate that I'm not having to make those big decisions where you're moving big pieces around the chessboard, as far as the Marine Corps goes. Anyone that stays in, if you were successful in tanks, you can be successful in pretty much anything you do, full stop. And those that decide to retire or get out, you're going to be a tanker for the rest of your life, and you will succeed in the civilian market. There are tankers all over the place who are great examples of people that have gone on to civilian careers. So I certainly won't talk to anyone into or out of doing anything, but if you've been successful in the Marine Corps tank community, no matter your rank, no matter your placement, you're going to be successful in what you go on to do.
Oh, thank you, sir. And to lighten the mood a little bit, as you can tell, I have my my Christmas sweatshirt on because this episode will air on Christmas. So I'm going to say a special thank you to the audience. Merry Christmas to you, sir. Merry Christmas to the audience. Thank you for all those that have subscribed. You guys keep the channel going, keep the momentum going. If you have not already done so, please do subscribe. Hit the notification bell for new episodes. And thumbs up, thumbs down. Either way, I'd like to hear feedback. Let me know what you think of the episodes. And for you, sir, thank you. This has really been enjoyable. And for those that it didn't come out during the interview, but I know that you're going to continue to be extremely helpful behind the scenes, setting me up with some folks. So I personally say thank you for your
Absolutely
time, for your effort. So
Merry Christmas, and for any of the tankers out there that are watching this, if you're somebody that has something to say, get in touch with JR.
Thank you.
Maybe you're a Korean War vet or somebody. We want to hear from you, or he does. But thank you for what you're doing.
Oh, absolutely, sir. And I mean, you called it my channel, and I appreciate it. I'm the guy behind the scenes. I'm the guy doing it, but it's our channel. I mean, it's the community's channel. So I thank you, sir. Very, very good for saying that. And with that, any parting comments?
No, thank you very much. Have a Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Hopefully 2021 is going to be better all the way around.
True story. Semper Fi, sir.
Semper Fidelis.